Yes, I'm Chris Cronin, and I teach political science here. And a lot of what political science is talking about how change happens, right? What we're talking about tonight. We could all chant change right now. Well, let's try it. Change! We just would have stonewalled me there. I'm not sure anything just changed, right? That might have done anything. So a lot of what we study is, all right, there's movement, there's stuff in the street, but how does that ever become something lasting or something meaningful? And so I'm here to talk a little bit about the context of our world in which you might want to achieve some amount of change. And it is a fairly polarized world. But before we get to that, let me talk about being a fan. So I have a little 1.5-year-old at home, screaming her little head off because she's teething, but she's wearing that Cubs onesie, and when she's not screaming her head off, I sing songs to her with the guitar. And one of the songs I sing her, that's right, it is cute. One of the songs I sing goes like this: you can be an astronaut, you can be an accountant, and so on, all the things you could be, but at the end, just don't be a Cardinals fan. Hate Cardinals. But no, of course, I don't really hate the Cardinals, and I could be engaged with a pretty demonstrable argument with the Cardinals fan. But at the end of it, we're probably going to leave on civil terms because we love baseball. Right? That's being a fan. Here's what a fanatic looks like, my distinction here. This is John Travolta in a movie called The Fanatic that you shouldn't watch. I didn't watch it, but look at his look at his haircut. I should have just photoshopped his haircut just on a black screen. This is being a fanatic, right? You're not going to share reality with a fanatic. You're not going to share a reasonable conversation with a fanatic. There's no room for dialogue, compromise, any of those things. So what's the point of talking about being a fan or me suggesting you should be a fan and not a fanatic? Well, I started thinking about this a long time ago, how in sports you can argue, and how in politics it seems less possible. In fact, a lot of times you leave never going to talk to that person again, right? And part of the reason I started a course called Politics in Sports, like maybe there's something we can learn from how discourse works here. So, I mean, here's a Cardinals fan making a pretty important point, probably, to a Cardinals fan. But yeah, I started thinking, why not the same thing in politics? And one of the main reasons, and there's several reasons, one of the main reasons is polarization, at least today. So, what is polarization? I bet you have some idea of what it is if you have Facebook and you see some rant from an uncle and you're like, that's not the reality I live in. It's a smidge of what polarization feels like. We've known for a while in political science that Congress, one of our institutions of government, is fairly polarized and has become more polarized. This is some data graphs starting at the top in the 90s and coming to today, and you can see the lines are moving apart. That's not really much debated in our field. What has been debated is whether the American people really look like that or not. And here's a couple political scientists, Alan Bromowitz from Emory, Morris Fiorina from Stanford, and they've been on opposite sides of this debate for more than 20 years. Alan's saying, yeah, the American people look polarized. His data coming from a lot of survey data that we do every year in political science, asking people about ideology. And Morris over here, who bought me lunch, so I sided with him for a long time. Look how nice, he's such a nice guy. But Dr. Fiorina arguing, well, it's how you do those surveys, it's about how you ask the questions, and you might find Americans are actually closely divided and not deeply divided. And he's sticking to that story, but most of us political scientists have come to agree with Dr. Bromowitz that Americans do look polarized. Here's back in my day when I was studying politics and arguing that the two parties looked too similar and we needed some more radical thoughts in our world.
It's all your fault!
I did not do that. And here's 2017. I realize the year right now is 2022. It's only gotten worse, though. I promise. Right, so again, just to kind of compare. Lost the ability to. Here we go. That's okay. You saw that. So, what are the causes of that polarization? It's a pretty big social and political phenomenon, so I will just highlight a few of the causes. One is urbanization, and this is a phenomenon worldwide. This is not just America. We see polarization happening at a faster rate in America, but it is a worldwide phenomenon. Urbanization is happening everywhere. as people live in more different geographic areas, and the city is different than living out in the country, those people have different versions of life and values and so on. So that's a cause. Yeah, that's right. Ooh. We also have seen a little bit backsliding from democracy. We all seem to be heading towards democracy worldwide, and thought that was kind of inevitable. There's a historian at Yale who calls that the politics of inevitability, just believing it's just going to happen because it seems good and should. But we've seen authoritarianism rise, not just with old Booty here, but even in Western democracies around the world, we've seen a rise in anti-democratic sentiment. And as we no longer share similar values of governance, we obviously will have a harder time having political conversations. We let the states redraw districts in this country. That's why we do a census every 10 years. We decide where the people moved around, and then we redraw the lines. And so whatever party's in charge of that state legislature at the time draws the lines in our way can make them win. And so that contributes to safer districts, less competitive districts, and you get members of Congress that are more and more polarized because they're only competing with their own ideology. It's a fact. We have a little more interactive kind of variable here, and that is perception. We start to perceive each other as the other, and the more we do that, the more polarized we feel. At the top here, this is immigration positions in actuality, right? And this is the perceived immigration positions, right? Democrats think Republicans are like, nobody ever. Republicans think Democrats are like, let them all in, who cares? And so this is kind of an interactive variable that's constantly pushing us apart, right? We've got a weird inverse thing happening with identity as well. As political scientists, we hope you have morals and were raised with some values, and then look at politicians and political positions and go, well, that one fits with what's right. But more and more we see kind of the inverse, which is you are saying, I am this political position, and now I will fit everything into that. Again, that's fueling polarization as well. We only have two choices. That sounds like polls. How many polls are there? In the north and the south, right? And if I could use the baseball example, if I'm arguing with the Cardinals fan, we can at least both go, yeah, but at least we're not Yankees fans, right? Or the Dodgers. I don't know, pick a team you don't like. Should have left that one alone. But every election in our political system is the end of the world. It's the other team, and it's going to be the loss of us, and if they win, it's an either or, and that's obviously polarizing. I won't talk too much about this, but you've heard a little bit about it earlier tonight, and that is that news used to be delivered in a very partisan way. Early newspapers were funded by parties, and we moved away from that, but we've kind of moved back to that with what we call niche media, that you go to the news source that tells you what you want to hear to make yourself feel right. And so we get more and more certainty in our citizens believing they're right, which leads to more polarization. Okay, so back to the changey stuff. What can you do? I've got some ideas here. First of all, you can contact representatives, your representatives, and tell them you don't want the partisan gerrymandering anymore. And it sounds like a throwaway thing to say contact your representatives, but they don't get called that much. And when you call them or write a letter, those representatives get that stuff. So it is meaningful. You can contact them to end partisan gerrymandering. There are other kind of ballot initiatives that would give us more than the two choices if we wanted to take a shot at it. Vermont has messed around a little bit with this thing we call ranked choice voting. This is how we do the ballots for the Easter egg competition in my household. I tally all the ballots, and then the family goes, yeah, but you counted them. And I go, ha-ha, I win again. But you can choose first, second, and third choice, and when your first choice isn't going to be a contender, your vote then counts as whoever your second choice was, and that would encourage more than two options. It's something to think about anyway. Perhaps a little more tangible, run for office. That sounds crazy, but anyone can run for office. You don't have to be a lawyer or anything. And we have so few young people as representatives, and we have lots of young people in the world. We need more young people working as representatives. There are several organizations that will help you get started. I'll highlight one in a second. Not only does that help us with the representation thing, young people are less polarized in their politics. Helps us with my other goal. And lastly, avoid being the problem. So in terms of where you get your news, try not to be too polarized. I suggest get your news from any major newspapers, the way to go. If you're reading your news, you're probably better off.
Yeah.
Varying your sources, that's a good idea too. You heard some of that earlier tonight as well. And, of course, be a fan, not a fanatic. In a two-party system, the other side literally has to win sometimes, or we do not have a democracy. That's the minimum criteria for democracy, arguably. The other side has to win sometimes. There has to be a competition. And as icky as that feels, that is a reminder that, just like in my analogy with baseball, that we share love for baseball, that we share love for democracy. That there are some values we can remember in the background that allow us to accept the defeat and then compete on, right? So, understanding the context of the world you live in for change, I think, is helpful. That's my big message here, right? You want to go out and make some change, understand the world is very polarized. You're gonna have to tell your behavior to enact change in that environment. But also, be somebody who is conducive to moderation or compromise at least. Be a fan, not a fanatic.